Hey there, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain. It's time to push back against the nonsense that's written out there on the internet about me. This is a quote that is ascribed to me, and yeah, it sounds pretty bad. And the quote is this: I don't view humanity as a single species. This is how the quote goes. I don't view humanity as a single species. And what does that mean? Now, the first thing you'll note is that the quote ends with a ... which means, of course, that it's an incomplete thought, and that's your first context that you may not be getting the full picture of what I'm talking about. Now, species is a group of organisms with enough interrelated characteristics that they can breed and have viable offspring, and of course, that is all the races and ethnicities within humankind. So what am I talking about here? Well, this is put forward as some sort of racist statement, but where is it coming from? So the podcast is 2768. It's called Collective Guilt for Fun and Profit, and it is a Saturday call-in show from August the 9th, 2014. I'm going to play you the segment wherein the quote is. And so a young man called in. He wanted to talk about crime and punishment, specifically the death penalty and how prisons might work in a truly free society. And so we were talking about crime and punishment, and this is the context of what we're talking about here. He starts to talk about a man that he's heard of who was, I believe, a pedophile, and it talks about him in this way.
So he said in his conviction, he said that he was happy that they were going to put him away for 35 years because he was a enthusiastic and dedicated predator.
No restitution possible for the rape of a child. Or the murder of a child.
Right.
And but for certain ills, there is no restitution that is possible. Mm-hmm. And where restitution is impossible, forgiveness is impossible. And where forgiveness is impossible, it seems to me that incarceration, the isolation of the human virus from the community, is the right thing to do. I don't view humanity as a single species.
Okay, so we're talking about the predator-prey relationship between violent, destructive, rapey, murderous criminals and the general population. Now, I don't say humanity is not a single species, because that would be biologically and factually incorrect. So if I said anything about race, of course not. And using an analogy of predator-prey relationships to describe crime and punishment in human society. And that's it. There's nothing about race in this at all. So you can see the motives of the people who write this kind of stuff. These are the facts. This is my actual word. This is my actual voice.
This is regarding Gene Wars, our series on RK selection theory. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely something I recommend. He wrote in and said, given that there are gene wars going on, does it invalidate the non-aggression principle? The non-aggression principle doesn't work if it's not universal, and it's not universal because there are subspecies of humans in heavy opposition. We are not all the same, so why should the rules be extended across gene sets? And that's from Sam.
Just go watch Gene Wars. It's going to be a pretty important part of what we talk about in the show, is that brains are different. We don't all have sort of one soul brain that is roughly equivalent across the range. I mean, there are differences in intelligence, right? I mean, there's a bell curve of intelligence, and there's difference in ethnic levels of success on IQ tests. And so looking at human beings as one species is not biologically valid. We are a variety of subspecies, politically, ethnically sometimes, definitely in terms of gender, in terms of IQ, in terms of culture. These produce physical brain differences that are very hard to remediate when you get older. And so we are a cluster of genetics all fighting to reproduce their own particular genetics.
These are the facts. This is my actual word. This is my actual voice.